today we're going to talk about the difficulties and opportunities of long-term innovation, long-term strategic thinking. And the idea is to link innovation to strategy, right? What role does it play? And to do that, we need to add a few things. We need to understand more about how technology works especially, but there are some forces shaping the future. And then we need to think about time. The idea here today is to give you a mindset and some tools for thinking future-oriented with some precision or some wisdom. Looking at opportunities, we have been spending a lot of time on the left side here, understanding customers, what are needs, how can we break them up? Is the value we provided so much higher than the alternative they use today that they will be willing to pay? But what is more interesting now that we look towards the future a little bit more is the possibility side. Because needs are met by functions, and we know needs are relatively stable, right? So we still need everything on the Maslow pyramid. We need food and shelter, we need safety, we have social needs, the need to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. It might shift a little bit how we look over time, so there is some movement, but much of the underlying stuff is stable. But on the possibility side, well, the possibility side is changing all the time. Because here is where we have solutions, and solutions come in as new products and services. And if they have a better performance on the functions, we might want to shift. And then it makes sense to spend money on R&D to build new solutions that have new functions with better performance. So it constantly develops, it never standing still. So if we want to look at the future, and if we want to be having a time advantage and an insight advantage, this side is very important to try to figure out and try to understand. We can look at strategy, and what we want to do is to answer a question. What can we do today to create or capture a superior position in the market of tomorrow? And this is important because the market of tomorrow does not exist yet. So for Horizon 1, what is the current business? Let's make the best here. Horizon 2, then we have to plant some initiative, do some preliminary investments, do some experiments. We don't know if we will be able to maintain the revenues that we have today. So we need to proactively plant some seeds. And then Horizon 3 is even further on what could be some different role that we can play. And that might be something we look at as the star level horizon. The problem is that unpredictability increases exponentially over time. And this is because things are linked in chains of events. So something happens, then something else happens. And the third thing that happens is really difficult to predict. So the weather tomorrow is 60% likely to be the same as today. But the day after tomorrow, it went down to 36, and then it's less. And that's just the weather. Here we're talking about technological development, ideas, activities of people that run companies, you know. So predetermination decreases rapidly and uncertainty increases. So chains of events that are all uncertain, that's called the butterfly effect. Therefore, we have to have different thinking when we think strategically. Because in the near-time future, we use forecasting. That's a bit like the weather tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. There's some inertia, there's some momentum in what happens. I'm here in this room. I cannot be in Tokyo in 2 minutes because I have to get there. You know, there's some forces that keeps the world together, thankfully. It's not completely random all the time. We use trend analysis to try to get a feeling for the likely states of the nearby future. We have the product almost ready. When will be a good time to launch it? Or like, let's look at trends and see what would be the best. But with foresight, the unpredictability is larger than the predictability. What we do here is forming an idea of what would be a possible future. We try to often make scenarios like we have 3 different scenarios that are all plausible, but they are different from each other. So plausible means that the trends that combine in those scenarios are internally consistent. Oil price going up and more electric cars, urbanizations, those are reasonable combinations. That could be a scenario. Oil prices going down, maybe the diffusion of electric cars will be slower. That's also an internally consistent scenario. So with the shorter perspective, let's say a year, 2 or 3, be right, or you try to be right. But with the longer term, it's more like I want to be less wrong. How can I be wrong here? That's a really good question to ask if you want to be right most of the time. So hold your strong opinions weakly. That's a tip from forecaster Paul Sappho, one of my favorite experts in this area. And for the really long run, maybe we have to be wise. What's the right thing to do? There are some things that we can know. So first of all, the driving forces. We can think about trends as things that unfold over time. If you want to define it, you can say that trends are patterns observed in data. Some trends are difficult to predict, but not all. I will give you 4 examples from the PEST framework on trends that we can predict reasonably, at least roughly. And if we are on the shorter time horizon of forecasting, we can predict the most likely, but also the best case and worst case. So we sort of bound the uncertainty at least into a range. And if you want to go deeper, you can look in these things like tipping points. So we have technology S-curves. The base could be very, very long, and that something happens. The S-curve is easy to predict, but the tipping point is difficult. Self-reinforcing loops, that's something we want in our business model. We can have pendulum effects, often social trends. We have a trend towards individualism, and then it goes over to collectivism and then back again. It might change a little bit how it looks, but often trends comes with counter trends. We're going to take a look at the 4 factors of the PEST analysis to see what can we know. Political trends tend to be something like pressure building up over time, and then there is like a crisis and upheaval. And we could see this in the Arabic Spring. There was rebellions and revolution attempts, and one country inspired the other and so on. So it could be very, very small thing that sets it off. It's like a balloon that's really filled with air. And what happens is that it doesn't just turn into a well-functioning democracy. It's more like that it finds a new local minimum nearby. It's really difficult to predict the time for change, but you can see that sometimes something is ready for change. Economic trends, they are working in cycles. So we have 6-7 year business cycles, but we also have 60-something year long cycles, the Kantradiev waves. And basically the underlying theory is that when a new technology comes, especially if it's self-reinforcing, it generates a lot of growth and wealth creation, increases standard of living. But the problem is that when you have an increasing standard of living, people get used to that. And then growth flattens out, and we start to keep increasing our standard of living with credit, borrowing money and so on. And then in the end, we can't borrow more, and the prices of real stuff, like commodity prices, goes up because we print money, borrow it, and then the prices have to go up of things that are in limited supply. And then there is a crash. So we talk about spring, summer, fall, winter cycles. So the spring is where you really have this technology-driven growth. Then you have the credit-driven growth, and then you have the unfortunate hangover. And it's like it takes a generation and then nobody has learned, so that it starts all over again. So often when you have this very, very high credit and debt, we also fall into large wars. So with a 60-year cycle or so, credit bubbles and wars. Societal trends. So societal trends, as I said, there could be pendulum effects, trends and counter-trends. Societal trends are so many that it's really difficult to say something about them in general. Technology, the last one. So technology has this S-curve, and as he said, you have a long linear development where it's more like an R&D issue, and then it takes off. One thing that could indicate that we're getting near this tipping point is that there's a lot of failures seen. So when we see failures around the new technologies, not necessarily mean that it will never happen. It might mean that it's about to happen, because now people are actually trying to put it into a business model and get it out on the market. And it will not happen before someone do that. So at least one of the main conditions for it to happen is there. And we also overestimate the potential of the technology. So this is our view on what the technology can do for us. And it's much higher than what it can actually do. Then it catches up. Technology improves over time. And then we have a period where we actually underuse the technology. It can do much more than we are aware of, or at least we don't use it so much. And what is then the result of this? Well, you can integrate this area here between the curves, and you have this first overvaluation of technology, what's called the hype. Then, of course, there's the failures, which might mean that there is some disillusionation and expectations fall down to a more realistic level. There's not a lot of room between the two curves, and then it actually happens, it comes. So when all people talk about NFTs or cryptocurrencies, maybe that is in the hype period, right? This requires a little bit different kind of thinking. First of all, let's try to think not so much about what is today and not so much about what can be done and not be done today. Instead, it's better to look at key drivers and generate plausible futures. And we look at different combinations that make sense of the major uncertain trends that will form a number of different scenarios. And it's much better to be vague and right than precise and wrong. It doesn't matter so much how the configuration details and so on. If we position ourselves so we can play in that area, we can play in that area, and then we can figure some things out, the details later. But if we make the wrong bet, we say it's going to be exactly this, and have that as our guiding mountaintop, anything else will put us in the failure track. So vague but right. It's the ballpark. We try to figure out what is the ballpark. The problem is usually to get from scenarios to a strategy. So to do that, it's better to do a timeline that goes from us forward. We have that great guiding star that is our utopian vision. That gives us direction. This is the starting point of the intentions that the company should be working with. It's like the needle of a compass. We're going to go this way. So this could be something like an utopian vision, a mission for the company. We want to, change the world in this way. And that's something most of the time you never reach. So for Tesla was started to force the car industry to transform, to phase out fossil fuels. It's much bigger than the company, it's much bigger than the profits. The worst you can have is we want to create shareholder value. That's a mission that never ever motivated anybody, and it doesn't give any direction. Next step is then to have the mountaintop. So this is the future, the system of the future where we want to be having our position. We select the mountaintop. There are some other mountaintops. Some might be alternatives for us. But others might be some that we really don't want to climb. They're not good for us. It's better that somebody else take it. This is something that I would say is giving us some orientation. We have an idea of this future landscape. It's not just the position in it, it's what's around it and how are the future actors relating to each other. How do they create value together as a system? Yeah, so this gives an orientation. It should also be a challenge that motivates us and inspire us. Next step is then that between where we are today with our possibilities and constraints and this peak that we want to go to, there is something. The original model has a chessboard, but I use a forest. The forest is much better. Forest represents unknown territory. We have to go into the unknown territory to gain something, to create some terrific results, but it also has hidden opportunities. You know, it could be that we found an ally in the forest, or it could be threats. We can find a new competitor or some dangerous things threatening our cash flows or risks that we need to take into account. So the forest, we can know it sort of roughly. We can see the peak sticking up on the other side, but we don't know it perfectly. And we know the part that is near us a little bit better because we can see that more clearly. So what we would want is a helicopter so we can map the forest and then go in. But even with a map, it would probably have some white spaces. Drawing some path through this forest initially is what a strategy is, basically. It's a rough outline of the activities to take us to our position in the future. And that gives us guidance. It tells us what to do in the different situations. Or guides us. It doesn't tell us exactly, but we should not get too far away from the path. And if we go away from the path, it's good that we know that we are doing it, so we look for an opportunity to get back in the right direction. The worst thing we can do is to ask for everything to be detailed out and explained and clarified beforehand. Then we'll never get out of today. We'll be stuck here forever. It's paralysis by analysis. We don't make decisions based on facts. The base for a decision are the intentions, what we want to achieve. Facts have two roles in this context. One is that due to facts, which are always from the past, we have created some mental models. We have learned how things work. We have created a cause-effect reasoning that guides us, our mental frame that we can model different courses or actions from. The other use of facts is basically to weed out the worst alternatives, right? So we don't know which strategy will succeed, but when we get information, we might be able to eliminate some, at least. That's also very helpful.